So the FMCSA has finally released some updated rules on the hours of service. Stay tuned. Hear what they mean for you. All right, so today I have my very first guest, the highly esteemed, the one and only Michael Ott Jr., Manager of Driver Development here at Arctic Express, also the owner of One Righteous Beard. And Mike does everything for us. So Mike recruits, Mike orients, Mike does everything, bringing a driver from first inquiry of what it looks like to work for Arctic Express all the way into being in the truck, and then he continues to mentor. He manages ELDs for us. And Mike, tell us a little bit about your history as a driver and then also in the office here for Arctic Express, just so folks know who it is that they're listening to.
Sure. So in January of 2000, I came in as a company driver, drove for a little over a year, moved into operations, did dispatch overnight breakdown, then bought a truck, was owner operator for 5 years, back into the office again, and now been in recruiting, orientation, and logs for about 6 years now.
Okay, so Mike has been with us through the entire transition of paper logs to electronic logs, which when we initiated that was AOBRDs, then the transition to ELDs, and now of course we've been long awaiting the FMCSA to announce this final rule on proposed changes to the hours of service, and they have just released that on May the 14th. Mike and I have spent a lot of time the last couple days trying to digest that information, talk about what does it mean for drivers here at Arctic Express, and what does it mean for drivers who are operating in the United States but working for other companies. So we want to shed some light on the 4 changes that are proposed. This was released on May the 14th, and they don't go into effect for 120 days. So right now, it is supposed to go into effect on October the 1st. That's 120 days after May the 14th. And there are 4, count them 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 changes that the FMCSA is proposing to roll out, and this should be what we see come October. So what are those changes? Rule number 1, short haul exemption is going to be expanded from 100 air miles to 150 air miles, and the daily clock is going to go from 12 hours to 14 hours of duty time. Here at Arctic Express, that doesn't really have anything to do with our operations, so we're not really going to spend a whole lot of time expounding upon that. Number 2 is adverse driving conditions. They are increasing the window for adverse driving conditions by an additional 2 hours. This is one that may have an impact here at Arctic Express, but we're always interested in a little bit of clarification on the definition of adverse. That's something that has always been a big question mark for us, and we've never been terribly sure that our interpretation of adverse and a DOT officer's interpretation of adverse would be the same. So that's one that we've always treaded lightly on. Number 3, the 30-minute break will now only be required after 8 hours of drive time, not just on duty time, but specifically driving time. Number 4 is a modification to the sleeper berth, split sleeper berth provision. Up to now, we've been able to do an 8 and 2. The request from many folks was greater flexibility, 7 and 3, 6 and 4, 5 and 5. Let us divide those 10 hours however we want. The FMCSA has come back and said they will allow us to expand to 7 and 3, but not any further than 7 and 3 at this point. As of right now, they feel like going to 7 and 3 allows them to ensure safety, to make sure folks are getting enough sleep without compromising the safety while someone is driving down the road. So the reason I've got Mike with me is because Mike has a lot better wisdom and insights than I do, as he is a former driver and he works constantly with our drivers and the existing ELD system. So we want to dive into the 30-minute break, and we want to do a deep dive into the split sleeper berth, and we want to talk about how is that going to impact both drivers here at Arctic Express and also drivers who are out there for other fleets. So let's start with the 30-minute break, Mike, and share with us how you see that most impacting and maybe benefiting or maybe not benefiting drivers today.
So I think the 30-minute break isn't going to be as much of a burden to the drivers today. It's going to naturally take its place. Add a shipper, add a receiver, fueling, stopping for lunch and dinner. The 30-minute break is going to be a combination of on duty and off duty. The old rule was off duty. New rule, it's allowing the on duty time to be calculated as the 30-minute break.
There are natural breaks that drivers take. And as long as you hit that 30 minutes, whereas before it had to be off duty time. So now, on duty not driving, off duty, or sleeper berth will all accomplish that 30-minute break. Now, I was thinking earlier, Mike, what if a guy, let's say he has a regular run, and that regular run only includes 350 miles of driving daily? Is he even going to need to worry about taking a 30-minute break?
No, the 30-minute break won't even come into play, because he'll have less than 8 hours of cumulative time driving. So, quick example, if I may, versus old rule and new rule. If a driver started his day with a 15-minute pre-trip, drove 4 hours, took a 15-minute fuel, and then drove 3 hours and 45 minutes, he or she would be in 15 minutes violation of the old 30-minute rule.
Right.
New rule, they would still have 15 minutes left of their 8-hour clock.
Right, and as long as they've reached their destination for the day, they're shut down, they've gone off duty or into the sleeper, and they haven't had, during that day of driving, to fulfill a requirement. The requirement was never imposed upon them to have the 30-minute break. Right. Now, I mentioned in another video about Arctic dispatching and planning according to the ability of the driver. And one of the challenges in our industry is we want to get to know our drivers, and we want to plan according to your abilities. We don't want to push you to where somebody is exhausted and uncomfortable. There are 600 per mile day drivers, and there are also guys guys or gals who tend to be more successful in that 400 mile range, 350, 450. And so depending upon how that day lines up, you may or may not have to take a 30-minute break under this new rule. Correct. Because it is solely connected to your drive time. It will no longer be connected to your on-duty time for the day. So what is your thought, Mike, about the benefit to the industry? Is this a good change for the industry?
Absolutely, I think so. It's going to free up fuel island wait times. Drivers will be able to get in and get their fuel much quicker, get out of there. We now have drivers who sit on the fuel island doing 30-minute breaks, which hold up everybody behind them. Now drivers can get in, use their on-duty time to fuel, and then if they do go to off-duty, go in, grab a snack, get some paperwork, whatever it is they need to do. And if those times add up to 30 minutes, they can be on their way and not holding themselves up or anyone else behind them.
Beautiful. Absolutely. So obviously we have not been in the inside discussions with the FMCSA, but it seems like they have done a good job of listening to, the commentary from your public, from the everyday driver, from organizations like OIDA and Truckload Carriers of America. all of these folks who are pleading for flexibility to be added into the electronic logging system. So it seems like we've definitely got a victory here on this, and something that's going to be beneficial for drivers. The big change in our opinion, and for Arctic Express, is the split sleeper berth extended flexibility. Now, this one, if you read the wording from the FMCSA, it sounds a little bit confusing, but here's the bottom line. It's a 7 and 3 or it's an 8 and 2 split sleeper berth. It has to equal 10 hours, and all of it pauses the 14-hour clock. If you take a 2-hour break, it pauses the 14. If you take a 3-hour break, it pauses the 14. Those shorter periods, previously, Mike, did not pause the 14.
The 2 did not.
That's right. So we only had an 8 and 2 option before. So if you have been using the split sleeper berth provision already, you had to spend those 2 hours, but your 14 was clicking. It was ticking away, ticking away, ticking away. And one of the unintended results, I'm not going to say consequences, but something that the FMCSA was hoping to accomplish with ELDs was improved safety. Unfortunately, I think just about every driver out there would say that they feel more pressed, they feel more rushed, they feel more forced to drive because they got to get those miles in, they've got to get that load delivered, and accidents did not go down, speeding tickets did not go down. And so hopefully with this opportunity to pause the 14, there's really a lot of good things that can come in to help the driver, to help the motoring public, to make roads safer in general. Mike, what are some of the things that you see immediately being impacted by this split sleeper berth that allows the 14-hour clock to pause?
So one of the things that comes to mind is, they've entertained the thought of implementing a rule in itself just to pause the clock for 3 hours. But with the addition to the 7 and 3, kind of covered that new provision. So
right, because it was a 3-hour pause.
Correct.
And the FMCSA has decided they're not going to move forward with that.
Right.
But the 7 and 3 kind of accomplishes the same thing.
Absolutely. Quick example, if a driver is in Indianapolis and gets loaded, starts his or her clock at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and they are driving eastbound, and they get just short of Columbus, Ohio, and they're on the west side of Columbus, and it's almost rush hour traffic. They can now stop and do a 3-hour break, get their food, their dinner, do some laundry, watch some shows, maybe even get a little nap in. Their clock now pauses. It lets rush hour traffic kind of clean up in Columbus, and then they're able to start their day after that 3-hour break and get right through Columbus, and they still have all their hours left.
Yeah, if you are not familiar with the research firm called ATRI does research about the transportation industry, and according to their calculations, rush hour traffic costs billions of dollars to the transportation industry every year. Whether you're talking about Atlanta, New Jersey, there's just these major areas, and we're based right outside of Columbus, Ohio. Columbus is surprisingly the 7th largest city in the US, and our rush hour is not horrible, but if you can avoid driving a semi around 270, up and down 71, across Route 70 during rush hour traffic, you should absolutely avoid it. It's safer.
Yes.
Right? And one thing that we know is that car drivers don't have a clue how to behave around semi-trucks. Can I get an amen? If you have driven, or if you do understand semi-trucks, spend some time watching cars, because they don't get it. They stay in blind spots. They jump right in front. They think that the space in front of a tractor trailer, which is actually called assured distance, is space for me. And so they jump right in there. So in Mike's example, if you start in Indianapolis and you're going eastbound and you can shut down for a 3-hour break, you can pause your 14, you can relax, you can nap, you can have dinner, whatever you need to do during that time. And then when you get back on the road, 270 and 71 and 70 are nice and back to reduced levels of traffic. Man, that sounds like a huge win.
Yeah, big time, time saver and safer.
Absolutely. There's another comment that I thought was so wise when I read it months and months and months ago from a driver who had lots of experience. And he said, back when I was running paper logs, I never wanted to drive when school buses were out. And so he said if it was a morning school bus pickup time or an afternoon, schools are buses are bringing kids home from school, he would always shut down when he was on paper logs because there was a little bit more flexibility, right? If you remember those days, flexibility is the term everybody used. But what he was doing is he was being safe, and he was making sure that, heaven forbid, he was never involved in some sort of tragedy with a school bus. And I just saw so much wisdom in his comment, and unintentionally, the ELD took some of that away.
Yes.
And now I think we're getting some of that back so that the safest driving practices can really be followed, whether it's avoiding rush hour, whether it's avoiding the beginning or the end of the school day. What about general drowsiness, Mike?
Yeah, absolutely. So years ago, they did research that early afternoons, that's the most fatigue hour for drivers, and also early morning hours. With the 14-hour rule, as we have it now, and it has been in the past, it forces a driver to have to drive through one of those fatigue hours.
Right.
With the 8 and 2 in the 7 and 3 split sleeper berth provision, that allows that driver, when they do hit that fatigue period, they can shut it down and it will pause their clock. It'll stop their clock. That way they can get a sufficient amount of rest, and they can come out of that break and they still have all their hours left to run.
Right. And Mike, you were just telling me this morning that it's the spring of 2020. We're in these crazy coronavirus days, but it's also seasonal allergies.
Yeah.
Mike, you were just telling me today that we had a driver recently just reach out to you because of drowsiness behind the wheel and just touching base with you on needing to shut down.
Absolutely.
So again, it's about safety. It's about being as safe as possible behind the wheel. And you are professional drivers. Nobody knows more than you when you're feeling safe to drive and when you're not. And Mike, would you talk about the clocks that we always talk about here at Arctic Express?
So we've got, FMCSA talks about 4. You've got the 70-hour rule, you've got the 14-hour clock, the 11 hours of driving, and then the 30-minute break within an 8-hour work period, which will now become a drive time. But here at Arctic, we have a 5th hours of service rule, and that is your physical clock. If you are falling asleep at the wheel, if you're tired, you're drowsy, you're out of hours. You have to stop and take a break. And what's nice about the 7 and 3 is maybe this 3-hour break is enough for you, but that is your judgment. But if you're going to take that break, communication is key. You got to let operations know, hey, I got to shut down for a little while.
Absolutely. So the last thing that we want is somebody who is drowsy pressing on. And we talk about this often. We talk about it more during the winter when we're talking about bad road conditions. And this is another area where, even though it's May of 2020, winter, unfortunately, it'll be here before you know it. I hate to even say that out loud.
Right.
But come next winter, this gives you an opportunity to shut down and let the plows come through and clean roads up, right?
Right, absolutely.
So there's a lot of flexibility, I think, that comes back into the hands of the driver. You are the one who knows if you're safe or not. You're the one who's feeling the road conditions, whether that's super heavy rains and thunderstorms, whether it's cold temperatures and maybe patches of ice, could be snowfalls. You at Arctic Express, what we always say is you're the one driving the truck, and you're the one who ultimately has the decision of whether it's safe to continue or not. If you're working for a company that doesn't say that, you might want to give us a call, because it's just not really the best way to move forward. And that's something that Mike and I talked about today. Do you think that any of these rules are going to be manipulated by companies and maybe used to coerce drivers to drive when they don't feel safe?
It can be, especially now that the driver will have more time on their clock with the pause of the 3-hour clock and the 7, or even the 2-hour and 8 split sleeper berth. That is going to give a driver a lot more time on his clock, and they have to be careful. The driver has to use their own judgment on what they're able to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So again, if you're working with a company out there that is pressing you, or you listen to these rules and you say, man, I don't feel very comfortable because I'm afraid my driver manager, my dispatcher is going to be all over me because they know that I was able to pause my clock here, but I'm not feeling safe to drive and I need to shut down. I don't want them on my back saying, well, you better get it there. You better get it there. If that's happening in your world, maybe give us a ring. What other limitations, Mike, come to mind when we talk about this October 1st possible go live date? What about ELD software providers? Are they all going to be ready by October 1st?
No. Neither will our drivers, and neither will officer training.
Absolutely. So look, we're sharing what we know today, and there's a lot of speculation on how exactly this is all going to roll out. But we know that every ELD software provider is going to have to update their systems. We don't know how they're going to get those updates to your individual tractor, but that's going to be one hurdle to overcome. Will the software be changed and updated in time? Also, our internal training of whatever that new system is, we've got to have some time to see it first so that we can learn it, so that then we can educate our people.
Absolutely.
Right? So we don't know when we'll have eyes on that new software. And then, as always, we've got the enforcement out on the road. And one of the things that was widely advertised ahead of the ELD mandate is that really every state is different. Every officer within that state's division is going to have a slightly different understanding, interpretation, and application of the laws. Oftentimes, officers were saying, hey, we need more guidance. We need more guidance from the FMCSA on how exactly this is supposed to happen. But overall, good or bad for the industry, Mike?
Good.
Agreed. I absolutely agree. This is something we've been waiting on for a very long time. And hopefully, the change to the 30-minute break, hopefully the change to the split sleeper berth and pausing the 14, and if you exist in a driving world where the adverse conditions are more applicable to you, or the short haul exemption is more applicable to you, again, what we want here at Arctic Express is for drivers to find a company that they like working for, where they have good earnings opportunities. We think that this will help increase the ability of work that a driver is able to do by just adding some common sense flexibility into what was a very rigid ELD. Now, one of the things that we always tell drivers is the hours of service rules didn't change from paper to electronic logs.
Right.
But it was the following of the rules was actually increased exponentially because, the old flexibility disappeared. And honestly, that was fine. That was appropriate because there was folks who used paper to do things that were absolutely not safe. So hopefully, come October the 1st, we are going to see these things go live, and these changes are going to have a positive impact on your earnings for you and your family. Mike, thanks for joining me today.
Hey.
Stay tuned. We might have more guests in the future. If you guys liked this video, smash the like button. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, go ahead and do that. And leave us a comment. Let us know where you're watching from. And if you are looking for a company, we would be happy to talk to you. This is your guy right here.
Thanks for what you do. Be safe and have fun on your run.
Absolutely. All right, guys. We'll see you next week.